All right, and we have, according to my clock, we have 1 more minute, and then we'll open on time, and people can jump in as we move forward.
Again, for those who joined a little late, we're expecting, we have about 80 people, right around that, who registered, so should have a good crowd today. We have 45 online right now, and Linda, it's 1 o'clock, so I'll let you start the webinar whenever you're ready, and I'm going to mute myself.
Okay, sounds good. So welcome to our webinar, A Quality Assurance Framework for Educator Preparation. This is hosted in collaboration with NASDAQ. We certainly appreciate their support. And we're the Association for Advancing Quality in Educator Preparation. I am Linda McKee. I'm the Chief Learning Officer for AAQEP, and I'm going to be the facilitator today. So as we're talking about this, the agenda is we're going to do a little bit of welcome introductions, and we'll do an overview of accreditation and AAQEP. We'll have a panel discussion from 2 of our state partners, and then we'll open it for questions and answers, questions from the attendees, answers from our team. And what we do is we ask that at that time, if you would please enter your questions in our chat box so that we can make certain that we have captured them. If we don't have an opportunity to answer them during this webinar, then we will ensure that they are posted so that we can get to that response at a later date. So today with us, we have Laura Glass, the Coordinator for Education Programs with the Office of Higher Education, the New York State Education Department. And we're also pleased that we have with us Lynn Hammond, the Executive Director of the Hawaii Teachers Standards Board. Presenters today include Mark Lascelles-Peterson, the President, CEO of AAQEP, Sungdi Shu, the Chief Solutions Officer of AAQEP. And again, I'm Linda McKee, and I'm very honored to be with you today. And I'd like to turn this over now to Mark Lascelles-Peterson, our President and CEO, who will go through a good overview about AAQEP and accreditation as a professional conversation.
Great, thank you so much, Linda. And hello, everyone. You can see the title we're using for this overview is Expectations and Aspirations, Accreditation as a Professional Conversation. And the approach we've taken in the creation and development of AAQEP is very much along those lines. We view accreditation as a profession's conversation with its internal and external stakeholders about quality and about how quality is defined, about the dimensions, about how it's identified, measured, and recognized, and even more about how it can be increased or enhanced. That's one way of thinking about improvement, which along with accountability is one of the 2 functions of accreditation historically in U.S. higher education, and about how we can generate new high-quality practices, how accreditation and this professional conversation can support innovation. As you may know, one of the concerns that critics have expressed about accreditation is that it tends to limit innovation rather than foster it. But in our view, as a professional conversation, we should be doing all of these things. Just a little bit of context setting, the state of the quality assurance conversation that we're having right now. When AAQEP came together, the group of us that created it felt that the time was right for some innovation in quality assurance. For one, because it's been a topic of some conversation. There have been a lot of constructive proposals coming out of a variety of policy shops as the nation, thinking about higher ed reauthorization, thinks about accreditation in a little more focused way. And as part of that conversation, the second bullet, interestingly, there's been some renewed emphasis on the importance of peer review and on professional judgment in this quality assurance conversation. A recent GAO report came out saying, to inform Congress in its consideration of the Higher Ed Act, saying be sure to pay attention to that. Don't lose the focus on peer review. It's also a propitious time because of the advances we've had in technology to facilitate some consistency and efficiency in these processes. We have some new tools at our disposal to think about integrating. We also have some new incredible sources of evidence. I won't spend a lot of time on this point, although sometimes I do in other presentations. in other presentations, thinking about the development of teacher performance assessments that are going on. We also have had the development of some data systems that are facilitating tracking of graduates and some new paradigms, and we'll keep moving along, but you can see it's a good time for thinking about. And I'm seeing in the dialogue that we're having problems with the audio. I'm going to try to hold my microphone a little bit differently. I hope this is going to come through all right. The slide I'm showing right now is of the extent of the conversation as we got it started, of the working groups. The working groups that were responsible for creating AAQEP. You can see there were 43 folks from across the country, and the stars on the map indicate where these people came from. When we got started, we were working extensively with 4 states, 2 of whom are represented on the panel that we'll be talking to later. New York, Michigan, Utah, and Hawaii were the largest states participating, but you can see we had folks from 14 states, 39 institutions, including folks from state education departments as well. As we got going, 3 working groups formed, one to take a look at expectations, which covered standards and evidence, another on process, and another on consistency and capacity. And what those working groups had to do was to tackle these 5 fundamental aspects of accreditation. So looking at consensus standards, making sure we had standards that were consistent with research and where research didn't tell us what to do with good practice. Also, rules of evidence that would support credible decisions. We had to pay attention to processes that would support collaboration and ensure consistent operation, and also continuous review of the accreditor's own operations. Those were the fundamentals we looked at. We took a look at them in light of some design principles as well. In addressing those fundamentals, we wanted to make sure that collaboration among providers was at the heart, right? The idea of accreditation as a professional conversation about quality suggests that collaboration is going to be an important part of it. We also wanted to design the system so that it would be improvement focused and innovation friendly. Again, one of the critiques of accreditation recently has been that improvement and innovation have been sidelined in the interest of compliance, and so we wanted to bring that back into balance. We also wanted to ensure that in this educator preparation accreditation space that we were very much focusing on partnerships among institutions and with state agencies, and to ensure that we could have a comprehensive situation to start out with, so that all types of providers and all types of programs would be included from the beginning, meaning initial as well as advanced programs and leadership programs, and also addressing all the types of providers that are in the increasingly diverse landscape of institutional providers that are engaged in educator preparation. We also set out to ensure that we would have consistent preparation and calibration for all participants. We know that consistency in quality assurance processes, in the actions of reviewers, in the actions of site visit teams is very important, so that was a focus. And we set out, knowing that budgets are tight everywhere, to ensure efficiency and frugality in our operations to the extent that we could. So that was what we worked on, and here's the process, familiar to several of you who are on the line, but here's the flow of events. We had the working groups together from August through September of last year, drafting recommendations in those areas, putting together a framework. We took that draft framework around to conferences in 12 different states, and lots of other video presentations and the conference calls as well in October and November, as well as posted the draft on our website with survey response form available. We had lots of comments back, and thank you to all of you who did participate in the conversation about quality by engaging either at the conferences and or in the survey responses as well. And we got quite a bit of feedback, very valuable feedback, which we took and reviewed and incorporated into a final version. That final version was posted in January of this year, and we currently have members on the basis of those standards working on developing self-studies. Our membership numbers are right around 20 right now, with, and we know there's quite a number of others that are getting ready to send things in. We've got folks working on materials in preparation for site visits in February and March of 2019. And one other sort of timeline element that's not on here that I'll just mention because I'm sure it'll be of interest to folks. We are in the process of dialoguing with CHIA. We will be seeking CHIA recognition. As many of you probably know, a full CHIA application requires having completed some site visits and decisions so that you can include that as part of the application. So after we've done the site visits in February and March and had a decision meeting, then we'll have our full application ready and continue moving along with that CHIA application process. So we put all that together with the working groups and staff and with input from the field to create a quality assurance process that can promote awareness of quality, that can support improvement, encourage innovation, and facilitate collaboration. So in this next couple of minutes, I'm going to turn to the question of the expectations framework. That means the standards and the evidence rules. So starting with the standards, we put together standards that focus on consensus expectations in the field, the things that are agreed upon that we all acknowledge where there's little disagreement, we're working on things, but also the shared aspirations. I'll say a little word about that on the next slide, and addressing our common challenges and contextual opportunities. So those are the pieces that are addressed in the standards. And this slide shows you the conceptual framework that the working group that developed the standards was working on. What are these standards about? Well, the top row tells you what they're about. They're about completer performance and they're about program practices. Those are the two things that are essentially covered in standards and quality assurance in the field. The other rows and in the labels in that first column are where we think we found a way to solve a problem that's a challenge for all accreditors. Every accreditor has to do two things, has to account for the things that are established in the area of focus already, but also the aspirations within the profession. So to take the first row, the fundamental expectations, we wanted to ensure that these standards addressed the expectations that are widely shared, not controversial, and in our field there are many of those, and for which there are widely accepted measures that are available. Not that the measures aren't without some controversy, not that any one of them is perfect, but there's a whole category of aspects of our field where there's general agreement on what needs to be included, on what it looks like, on how it's measured, and that's covered in the fundamental expectations. At the same time, there are aspirations or shared questions. There are directions that a field is going, new challenges that are being widely tackled, but where the conclusions aren't in yet and where the measures aren't solid yet. We wanted to include those things because otherwise, and this is part of the dynamic in accreditation, if you only do that top row, you end up setting a ceiling on expectations. And that's where the limits on innovation, the limits on improvement sometimes come into play. So we're trying to negotiate that tension by saying we have standards about both. And I'll show you the next slide, which shows you how our four standards break out. Under completer performance, we have a standard on candidate performance, candidate and completer performance that addresses those fundamental expectations. Similarly, under program practice, there are a lot of things we know need to be a part of a program, need to be aspects of it, and they're there in standard 3. At the same time, we have the things that we're reaching for. We have the things that are very specific to a local context, to a state context, or a local context, or an institutional mission context that still need to be addressed, and those are in standard 2 for completers and in standard 4 for programs. And here's what those standards look like. Standard 1 says that program completers perform as professional educators with the capacity to support success for all learners. Two sets of words are bolded there. First, perform, because in the system there is an emphasis on performance, on candidates being able to accomplish what they're being prepared to accomplish, right? Having them ready to take on the tasks. Professional educators is also highlighted because, as I said a moment ago, these standards are intended to cover all types of programs for all types of completers, so both initial and advanced, and including leadership, etc. So performance as professional educators, the core of standard 1. Standard 2 refers to this other challenge with completers. Completers have to be able to adapt to working in a variety of contexts and to grow as professionals. The point of preparation is not just performance in the preparation program itself, of course. It's the ability to take what's learned, to take the experiences and the skills that have been developed and to take those into new contexts. So Standard 2 addresses that. Standards 3 and 4 relate to program practices, and Standard 3 is simply the program has the capacity to ensure that its completers meet Standards 1 and 2. Standard 4 is the one that pushes a little bit beyond that to say program practices also should strengthen the P20 education system in light of local needs and in keeping with the program's own institutional mission. So we'll spend a little bit of, just a little bit of time on those first two standards here. Standard 1 repeated there, and in a sense Standard 1 and 2, even though they may draw on some common data sources, are really addressing different questions. And in working with some of the institutions that are starting to put this system into practice and starting to develop their self-study, we found this clarification to be a little bit helpful. The question that Standard 1 answers is, at the end of the program, are completers ready to fill their target professional role effectively? And what evidence can be pulled together to support that claim? Standard 2 asks, are program completers prepared to work in diverse contexts? Have they done so successfully, and are they growing as professionals? We can come back and talk about the standards a little bit more when we're in the discussion, but in order to get the whole system put out, I'm leaving the standards there and moving on to think about the evidence requirements. How will the evidence be pulled together to show that these standards are met? Well, AAQEP, the working group that developed the expectations framework, the standards and evidence framework, put together these points, and they're elaborated a little bit more in the documents, of course, but these are the guidelines for thinking about evidence. Number one, not controversial at all, multiple measures are required because no one measure gives us the information that we need. We need multiple measures in order to have a full picture to be able to answer those challenging questions, and we need those measures with reasonable continuity. And the two halves of that bullet point actually go together. You have multiple measures precisely because any one measure is not going to give you all the evidence that you need. And what that means is the right time to change from a worse measure to a better one, when you know you've got one identified, is as soon as you know that you've got a better one to put in place of a worse one or a weaker one. So reasonable continuity, but the ability to change and be flexible in changing measures because there are multiple ones, right? Second bullet, another requirement is that the quality of evidence be investigated and shared. That means the validity, the reliability, the trustworthiness of whatever type of evidence. And the system does welcome all types of evidence, qualitative as well as quantitative, as long as appropriate rigor is exercised in looking at the quality of that evidence. So multiple sources of evidence, all the evidence has to be solid. We have to know the characteristics of it. The third and fourth bullet points are a pair as well. The third bullet point points out that priority will be given to direct performance measures. And I'll pause on this point just to note this. In the writing about accreditation in general, institutional as well as programmatic, those who are doing the critiques, the very productive and constructive critiques, have pointed out that one of the tough challenges accreditation faces is measuring learning outcomes, especially in things like general education, very important part of an institutional mission, very challenging in terms of measurement. And also in some content majors, been difficult to get student learning outcomes, SLOs, various other strategies for measuring learning. But what the folks who are writing about this will then point out is there are some fields that are further ahead and that the rest of higher education could learn from. And they identify specifically fields like educator preparation, nursing, social work, accounting, places where the performances that the professionals will need to be ready to conduct are known and can be measured. So they look at fields like ours, educator preparation, as having an advantage because we can actually measure directly the performance that is needed by folks when they graduate. So priority in the AAQEP system is given to direct performance measures, in other words, to things like teacher performance assessments that are conducted at the end. Again, in the context of multiple measures, no one measure is the answer or overrides everything else. but in weighting the evidence priorities given there. At the same time, fourth bullet, indirect and downstream measures also have to be considered and brought into play. I know we have folks from many states on the webinar right now, and as you know, different states have very different stages of development and their capacity for sending information back to providers. We know that the measures we're using, the systems we're using are still under development. These are wonderful developments. It's terrific to have information that can come back to the extent that we have it. But it has to be looked at critically, just as we look at the quality of evidence of all types. We have to look at the quality of this evidence. We have to look at the coverage. In many cases, whatever evidence does come back is from only a small proportion of candidates. And so these two bullets together, priority to direct performance measures that can be obtained for all candidates who are completing a program, while also looking at the indirect downstream measures that we can gather up later, but looking at them chiefly for the information they can give to us on program performance, on what needs to be done to improve the program. Bottom three bullets I'll just cover quickly. Information in the system will be broken out by initial and advanced and by the different programs within that. So disaggregation of lines of evidence critical to seeing internally relative strengths and weaknesses and to understanding improvement possibilities. AAQEP also intends to share innovative measures. Remember that collaboration is one of the design principles, so as we've thought through everything, we've tried to think of how we can build the field together, and so sharing innovative measures is one way. And the final bullet, many of you on the call will be familiar with Tony Breich's work in improvement science, the art of getting better at getting better. And he points out in that work that when we think about quality of evidence, we have to link our expectations for quality of evidence to the purpose we're after. And specifically says that when we're engaged in improvement and innovation, we need to be ready to exchange measures quickly when we start to learn more things and refine the things that we're doing. So I'll mention a little bit more about that when we get to evidence, or rather get to thinking about innovation. But the point is, within this whole sweep of evidence requirements and priorities, we've tried to take into account those various dimensions. So that section covered the standards and evidence expectations. I'm going to now spend a few minutes on the process and the pathway to accreditation. A separate working group was working on that, and here are some of the fundamentals. Some of this will look very familiar. I mean, AAQEP is trying to build on the solid foundations that we have in our established accreditation practices, and these are those established accreditation practices. Self-study will guide the process. We've developed a process to be collaborative and interactive. We will have support built into and layered throughout it with familiar features like the off-site review preceding an on-site review with peer reviewers, and with a full accreditation term of 7 years. Of course, if there are major problems, major discrepancies in the data, shorter terms of accreditation would also be there as well. So on that base of the familiar, we've also added some dimensions that grew out of the experience of our field recently. I'll run down those just briefly. One is the cohort model. Institutions across the country that were represented in the working groups had found great support with each other in collaborating while they were going through accreditation processes. And so they built into the AAQEP process this idea of a cohort. What that means is any institution that starts going through the accreditation process will be put in a cohort. We'll have a list of all the institutions that are going through. People have asked us if they could connect up with the institutions they wanted to work with in a cohort type of setting, and we said absolutely, this will be open and fluid. But once a cohort is established, there will be a monthly conference call so that everyone in the cohort can put someone or any number of people they care to on the conference call to get information, to ask questions, to share perspectives. This will create a very open conversation and will make people aware of what each other is doing, so that if they care to, they can collaborate further, on their own initiative and support each other. That's not a required aspect. We're only trying to create the conditions for it, and I think it's a very smart thing that the working group put together. We have in the process, tried to build in a strong emphasis on understanding the context. I'll go through these a little bit quickly. We've set up a strengths-based model, which means as site visits come closer and are being decided upon, as has been suggested in some of the literature on accreditation, not every site visit needs to look the same. Stronger places with strong data and consistent performance may require a slightly smaller team than places where the data and their own self-report shows that there are some issues that are needing a little bit more attention. In the same way, very small programs would typically require a smaller team compared to larger, more complex programs. So we're going to do a strength and size-based differentiation. As we said, there's a number of approaches to supporting, giving formative feedback, and there's one item that I'll just mention as part of that layered support. The proposal stage was added to this process, and the idea with the proposal is that about 2 to 3 years before the site visit, institutions will complete a proposal for how they're going to do the study. They're going to identify which evidence they're going to use. They're going to talk about how they will attend to the quality of evidence, in other words, the validity, reliability, trustworthiness of the evidence, and identify approaches they will take to contextual challenges in their local situation. And that proposal will be made available to some peer reviewers. We're trying to engage collaboration everywhere we can, and so this role of peer reviewer of proposals will be another role that's created within the AAQEP system. And it'll give the advantage to institutions of actually having formative feedback at the point where it can be formative and support finalizing of the whole process. So we're excited about that, and we can spend a little bit more time on that in the discussion area if we want to. So I'm just going to move ahead so that we get to the discussion in time and say, this is the outline that the self-study will take. The basic outline is here, an introduction and a section dealing with the evidence for each standard, 1 through 4, and then some appendices that will address particular aspects that are highlighted in the standards. We didn't go into this level of detail of the standards, but candidate recruitment, selection, and monitoring is an element in Standard 3 that will be treated directly here. Completer support and follow-up. And I'm going to turn it over to Linda for a discussion of the consistency and capacity aspect.
Thank you, Mark. So we're going to move through this pretty fast, but I did want to mention, since we're moving through it rather rapidly, that this webinar will be available on NASDAQ's site, and on our site we'll have a link to NASDAQ's posting. So we're talking a little bit about, this is a new phase for quality assurance. And the innovation that we really see as an important part of quality assurance that leads to quality improvement. That's an extremely important part about the accreditation that we feel needs to be addressed strongly if we're going to make some changes in what's happening in our programs. So looking at this, the document here that we have, the information on the slide, really talking about how innovation is going to be supported, and really thinking about what it is that we can do that's a little bit different and not fitting into a very tight structure of not allowing us to make some changes and revisions. Mark did mention about the timeline earlier. We are looking at some spring 2019 accreditation visits and some decisions to be made, and then of course we will then recognize the petitions to CHIA, and if it is appropriate, to the U.S. Department of Ed, depending upon the reauthorization of the Higher Ed Act. So I'd like to then move right on into some comments from our state partners, because this is specifically about the states and how are the states addressing this. And we'll be asking for a little bit of assistance later on at the end of the webinar. So if you could stay with us, we'll talk about that. But right at the moment, I'd like to turn it to Sungdi, to Laura Glass, and to Lynn Hammond. And welcome, Laura and Lynn.
Thank you.
Thanks, Linda.
Thank you.
I think it's just because of the time, I'm just going to go right into the questions for Laura and Lynn. I'm actually, you can see there are 3 questions on the screen, and I was hoping, so Laura and Lynn, can you each take maybe like 5 to 7 minutes to answer these 3 questions? You can help
Sure.
us, just kind of go through the thinking and the process of your respective states. I think that would help us to kind of see, which path that other states may go down, or the lessons that they have to learn from you guys. Thank you.
Okay, Sangdi, this is Lynn. So first of all, aloha and good morning from Hawaii. I'd just like to kind of share what we went through as far as our thinking process initially. It was just at the right time that AAQEP was being formed. All of our preparation programs had just finished over their 7-year cycle, their national accreditation. So it was kind of a natural process for everyone to start thinking about, well, what's next? And both our standards board and the Hawaii EPP wanted to have additional options because we're a very small state, although mighty, and it also included indigenous and culturally focused programs, and we were really interested in something that was flexible and could meet the needs of our programs, not just a one-size-fits-all. So the last thing that we really considered was that we had a lot of confidence in the good folks who were forming AAQEP. Mark, Linda, Sangdi, we knew about their expertise in accreditation, and most importantly, we knew that they were people of integrity and that we could trust what they were doing. So that's really what formed the basis of our initial decision to take a look at and now work with AAQEP.
Great. This is Laura from the State Education Department here in New York. So I'll also begin by providing a little bit of background information. New York State requires that educator preparation providers be continuously accredited by a professional education accrediting association for program registration purposes. There are 95 EPPs in New York State. And for a period of time, the EPPs could choose from a menu of options to meet the continuously accredited requirement between NCATE, TEAC, and a New York State accreditation process. And the ability to choose an accrediting association is really important to the EPPs because it allows the large number of diverse institutions to choose association that best fits their interests and needs. So very similar to Hawaii, which interestingly is because we have so many institutions that range from New York City to Buffalo to the rural communities across New York State, as well as small liberal arts colleges, as well as the large research universities. So when several years ago, when the New York State accreditation process was discontinued and then NCATE and TEAC were consolidated, making the continuously accredited requirement by default, one option, the EPPs communicated to the department for their desire to AAQEP to become an option for accreditation, enabling them to choose the accreditation association that best fit their institutions as in the past.
Thank you. So what about some of the, specific things that you have to go through as a state to move things forward? Would you mind sharing that with us?
Okay, this is Lynn again in Hawaii. For us being a very small state, and our board is always, receptive to being inclusive, working with the preparation programs, and also being proactive and being willing to look at new ideas, new processes. It was very easy for our board, which has full responsibility for approval of teacher preparation, to pass a new policy that allowed AAQEP as an option for review. So I know that certainly not all states are able to be that, that flexible easily. So we were very lucky, and our board passed that policy last year to allow any preparation program in Hawaii, state-approved program, to go through the AAQEP process as an option.
In New York State, the department had to approach the Board of Regents in order to make a regulation amendment because the current regulations say that to be continuously accredited by a professional education accrediting association, AAQEP doesn't currently meet the definition because it's not recognized by the U.S. Department of Education or TIA. So we proposed an amendment to the regulations so that EPPs could work with an accrediting association that is seeking U.S. Department of Education or TIA accreditation. We started the process last December, and it was the regulations were officially amended last week.
Great. Thank you, Laura.
Right.
So I'm sorry, I kind of skipped the second question. So like in between the initial thinking and then, the final steps and processes that you have to go through as a state, can you talk a little bit about, what kind of considerations that you have to have during this process? What kind of, thinking and preparation that went into convincing your board of standards and board of regents and your stakeholders in large. Laura, would you mind take that question first?
Sure. Well, the EPPs did a really good job of communicating to the department their desire, and that came through when the department leadership talked to both our professional standards board as well as meeting with deans across the state. And in addition, there were just informal conversations with faculty through email, in person, and when they would send letters to the department. Say that was the primary consideration is really just the communication, and AAQEP did also it was very helpful, the communication that they provided to the department and the EPPs. They reached out to the EPPs in several ways, including inviting the faculty administrators to serve on the working groups, participating in the NIACD meeting this past fall, talking with deans in multiple meetings, and providing webinars. And AAQEP also contacted the department during each stage of its growth, keeping us informed about its progress. In the case faculty, department leadership, or the regents asked us questions, and also reassured us during that 6-month process trying to get the regulation amendment approved that everything was moving forward. I'd say a key was the communication with the Board of Regents, and that was particularly helpful. The EPP faculty and deans contacted the regents in their region about the desire for the accreditation options, and in addition, our counselor and a co-chair of the Board of Regents Higher Education Committee attended a virtual working group meeting about the emerging AAQEP policies and procedures. That enabled them to have an opportunity to hear and ask questions about the association's guiding principles, as well as the logistical issues that the groups were tackling.
Thank you. What about you, Lynn?
Thanks, Sangi. Well, Hawaii is the most remote place on Earth, so for us, personal contact is so very important. So early on, at every monthly meeting of our preparation programs, we had the continuing discussion about options for preparation review. And Mark came to visit both our preparation programs and our board early in the process so that we could personally ask questions. So that certainly helped contribute to the board's willingness to adopt AAQEP as an option. And also, we were very lucky to have two individuals, Carolyn Duran and Jessica Miranda, who became involved in the working groups so that we would have firsthand knowledge of exactly what was going on, and that they were able to report back to the preparation programs and to our board to keep them informed. And then just last week, we had a training that Carolyn organized with Mark for all of the preparation programs to help them, know about the process and know what to do to help them make their decision. I think we had about 30 representatives from the preparation programs at that training. So all of this, personal interaction and firsthand knowledge, I think, was really key, rather than trying to get bits and pieces, of what's happening. So that was all important for us.
Thank you. Let's see. And if you have any other questions with the specific state functions, I would encourage you to ask questions in our Q&A period of time that we have reserved. And now I think we're going to move on to the next section of the presentation, which is the Q&A. So just keep the questions coming. We do have a number of questions. The first question is from Jeanette. Do advanced standard programs interested in getting AAQEP have to lead to licensure endorsement or certification? And can Mark, can you answer that question for us? Thank you.
Sure. AAQEP's stance is that whatever a state requires to be included in accreditation, working in a state context, would have to be included. In addition to that, though, if an institution has other programs, advanced programs that may or may not lead to an endorsement or certificate or license, can be included in the process, because our view is that the quality assurance processes are important for all aspects of what someone does. AAQEP won't force anything into the process if a state doesn't include it, but at the discretion of the institution, whatever else they would desire to include. Absolutely, as long as it's related to education, of course.
Okay, thank you. And then our next question is AAQEP currently aligned with CHIA standards, or are there plans to align? And I think that question should also go to Mark.
Sure. The answer is yes. We are aligned with CHIA, and we're also aligned with the current U.S. Department of Education regulations, which of course may change if under a new Higher Ed Act. But in terms of CHIA, yes, and we're in conversation with CHIA. We fully intend to gain CHIA recognition. As with any new accreditor, we actually have to have completed a couple of cases to submit as part of that application. So we're very excited that we've got site visits coming up in February and March of next year, decisions shortly after that, so then we'll be able to get the full application in. But yes, we fully intend to be integrated into the CHIA system.
Thanks, Mark. This next question is, I think we'll have to, well, Linda, would you mind take this next question? It is about what type of guidance and support, what type of guidance and assistance is provided for the self-study process?
Yes, Sunday, happy to answer that question. We have talked a lot about the guidance, especially, in the formative process. And there are a couple ideas that have been put out there. One Mark mentioned about the cohorts, really looking at that collegiality, with the institutions, so that you have a better idea of some innovative steps and different ways to approach things, and also that consistency of hearing the message and sharing documents. The other thing that we've talked about also would be what we're calling at this moment a case manager. So a person who would be really giving that assistance on a formative basis, looking, as you go through the self-study process and that self-study report, helping to maybe fine-tune some of it, not specifically looking at it from a a grammatical standpoint or even statistical standpoint, those could be included. But, ensuring that, that all the pieces are being addressed, and ensuring that, maybe that there are some things that, in your report, the institutions probably, they might need some assistance in order to develop more in the report. So we have a couple ways that we're, definitely considering. The working groups have felt pretty strongly about how do we build in that support system. And so even though, I've addressed a couple of those areas, we're probably looking at developing out more, definitely looking at the workshops that we've been holding, trying to ensure that that information is available and we're getting that out to different regions. And then even for staff being available for fee consulting if necessary, in order to just help the faculty to understand the process a little bit better. So looking at quite a few different ways in order to give that assistance.
Thank you, Linda. And I think in your response, you probably also answered the next question, which is the guide to AAQEP accreditation published? So I'll move on from there. The next question is coming from Tennessee, and I think the context is about local contextual environment. And so the question is, does that mean if we have minimum requirements related to Tennessee expectations, such as performance on our annual report card, that AAQEP would honor that? Mark, would you take that question?
Sure, I'd be happy to. As a design principle, AAQEP is intent on working in close partnerships with the states, and so within our framework, and it's in Standard 4, we've said that institutions have to meet the obligations that they have to the state. So we would work out with the state, and I don't know the details, Amy, of Tennessee's report card requirement, but the intent would be that yes, institutions have to meet all their jurisdictional obligations, and that could be written into a partnership agreement, in a way that would support the process. But in general, our intent is to ensure that accreditation dovetails with state processes and is complementary and not contradictory with those processes.
Thanks. Mark, Linda, here's the question for you. Can you tell me what improvement science-based is, and what is the major differences between CAPE and AAQEP?
Well, improvement science is with the Carnegie Foundation, and it's Tony Bright's work, where they really are looking at a research process that is implemented and then has more specific benchmarks, so that you're not talking about, waiting until the end of the 3-year cycle before you can make some decisions and changes, that you're really looking at those benchmarks of shorter periods of time so that you can have more of an impact and throughout the time frame. It's proven to be quite successful. Been used for quite a period of time, again in the medical field, as we've known for a while, but he's fine-tuned it so that it's really looking at education. You can do some research on it with the Carnegie Foundation, their website in California. And so Tony Bright, Paula Mayhew have really done some excellent work with that particular model. Major differences between CAPE and AAQEP, we try not to touch on major differences, but the biggest thing that I want to tell you is that the acknowledgement of the innovation and, that second core that Mark was talking about at the beginning, where we have the quality assurance is one that we all, really in accreditation need to follow. But there's a point where there's quality improvement that is more flexible, more adaptable, really looking at innovations. And so we're talking about, how can we be responding to the needs of the EPPs for accreditation on a more contextual level. So I think that is what I personally see as the difference between CAPE and AAQEP. I think that we're going to have to allow that to fall out a little bit. We intentionally don't want to do comparisons. We just want to offer other options that might fit other needs.
Thank you, Linda. Okay, so next question, Mark. Do you have any providers or clients in California? Are we working with any California institutions?
Thank you. The question is, do we have anybody in California? We are in touch with the Credentialing Commission there, been talking with them, and yes, we've got a board member from California State University at San Bernardino, Jay Feeney, is a board member, and so we're reaching out more in California. We don't have anyone on board yet, but very actively engaged in conversations.
Okay, thank you. I think, Mark, can you also answer the next question about how are we working with SPA organizations?
Yes, thank you for that question. How are we working with the SPAs? We are in the next phase of development. We've got a new working group forming to work on program-specific evidence around, which would be around the SPA level issue. We've got some state education department folks from a couple of states. We've got some EPP people, and we've got 4 or 5 SPAs that have come together. So we're interested in finding a new way to leverage the expertise and the involvement of SPAs in the accreditation process. So that's an ongoing generative process we have going on. We're also in touch with several of the SPAs who will do independent reviews with the program. So that's an active conversation that's ongoing, pursuing it through a couple of different dimensions. As those of you on the line will know, sometimes SPAs have been involved in each of the various processes that have come before AAQEP. So we're looking at starting a new line of conversation there and excited about what new things we might develop, but also working with the SPAs as they do their own independent reviews of things.
Thank you. And our next question is, how do you envision measurement of strengthening of P20 system? Linda, can you take that?
Sure. How do we envision measurement of strengthening P20 systems? There's a pretty strong feeling about building that stakeholder engagement and really working with the APPs, working in collaboration with our P12 systems. It's something that I know that we've all talked about for quite a period of time, but it is in the standard. And then again, I'm going to continue on with Larry's second part of that regarding standard 2 just a little bit, and then Mark may want to jump in to add a little bit more at the end of that. But we're talking about the measures that are available, what data is available to EPPs in various states, and so I think that it's important for us to understand that we're not being directive on the types of measurements specifically. We're asking for multiple measures, and we're very cognizant of the fact that there are different requirements in different states. There are different levels of availability of data in different states. So it's the question, again, as Mark had mentioned earlier with the multiple measures, really, the quality of what you are using, the evidence that you're using to defend those measures. So, we've talked with a lot of groups who are working with the states, working with the districts, trying to collect that information, trying to get it in a different way, and not with the need of focusing it on one measure specifically, but really looking at multiple measures and perhaps being a little more creative about some of the measures. Mark, did you want to add a little bit more to that and on the piece specifically about the licensed teaching?
Yeah, thanks, Linda. I think I'll just I'll go into it this way. And Larry, thanks for the question. And what you honed in on is really that kind of boundary line or the demarcation line between the things that are established that everybody can get a hold of that we've got in that established expectations category, standard 1, and the area where we're dealing with our contextual challenges, one challenge being different types of data more readily available in different states because of different policies, and also the desire to reach out and get some evidence that we just can't get uniformly or comprehensively for everyone there. So that's why it's in the contextual challenge category. I think, that priority for direct evidence means wherever the direct evidence is available, that's what's going to get the most weight. But we still look at all evidence, indirect and downstream. So on that specific question of how would we look at that challenge of strengthening the P20 system, that's really one of the more exploratory, innovative areas where we think institutions are going to come up with different ways of exploring that. By agreeing to be in the AAQEP system, institutions are agreeing that they push for that goal. But it's going to be very different in different contexts, very different for institutions that are very tightly connected with one or two local districts, especially, for example, in large urban districts where there's a real tight connection between providers and a particular district or a district within a larger urban system. Very different from rural places where an institution may well serve a number of systems around. So we recognize, and that's why it's in that contextual challenge standard rather than in the fundamental expectation standard, because it's an area where we're exploring, we're gathering information, and where we're all going to learn together from what's found. So because folks were having a hard time hearing Santi, I'm going to just read the next question, and then, Linda, maybe you can take the one after that. We have a question: how will cohort partnerships come together? Initially, AAQEP will group institutions that are coming through the process at about the same point in time, under the assumption that people who are at the same stage in the process will have fairly similar questions and would be able to work with each other. But again, the only thing AAQEP will do is offer those, put people in cohorts and offer the monthly conference calls, and of course follow up with calls in between as needed. But institutions have asked us, if we would rather be in a cohort with others close to us geographically, even if we're at different stages in the process, could we do that? The answer is yes. Other institutions have asked if we wanted to be in a cohort with similar type institutions, maybe further afield, but really wanted to have a cluster of folks facing very similar challenge. Could we do that? The answer to that is yes. Others have said, well, we're currently engaged in a collaborative process with 3 or 4 institutions across different states. Could we take an existing network and create a cohort around that? The answer to that is also yes. So we'll make things available as much as we can. Linda, do we have time for one more question?
I think we can finish this one more, and then that might be the end of it. I'll just skim down through to see where we are with the others. But Kate has asked the question: given that EPPs are all on different schedules of accreditation, will AAQEP provide some possibility of grandfathering in EPPs interested in joining them? And the answer to that, I'll just quote Mark, the answer to that is yes. We will be recognizing other accrediting bodies so that you will have the option to join AAQEP as soon as possible, so that then we can help you to work through the process of getting the accreditation through AAQEP. So, and having said that, I'm going to go down. Kathy has asked about the revised expanded expectations manual. When will it be published online? And what I will say to you is that we are working on that as fast as possible. I'm not positive that we can say a specific date because we are working with all of our institutions. And Mark had noted that we have institutions across 14 to 15 states. And so sometimes, as I'm sure you're aware, that it takes a little while, to do all the fine tuning. But we will definitely get that out, and we will make certain that it is available through the NASDAQ website also, so that you have access to that. And there are a couple other questions that, we'll probably be able to respond to as soon as possible. We're really looking at the opportunity to include more information with our FAQs that we'll be posting soon, and then the responses, questions, and answers to this Q&A webinar time will be available on our website. So we'd like to just go on and do the closing. One thing I'd like to mention to you is this. this article that Mark did write, January 30th, it was published with the New England Board of Higher Education. An excellent article, and the link is there for you. And we do have, as I mentioned earlier, some workshops. We had just completed yesterday the workshop at university at the Hofstra campus, and then you can see the list of others that are available there. You can sign up for those through our Eventbrite. We'll be continuing at that throughout the different regions, and if you're interested in hosting an AAQEP transitional workshop in your state, please let us know. We're also available to come out for some informational sessions. In fact, I'll be in Texas on Monday. So keep in touch with us, share your ideas, your critiques, your suggestions. One thing that we would like to mention is that this was a webinar that was really focused more specifically for state education agencies, even though we're very happy that the EPPs are with us. But what we're trying to do is really bring together a group of state education agencies members and make some have some brainstorming about what would what would be a state membership agreement that would be beneficial to all of our partners. And, happy to talk about that, happy to, start that conversation. We will probably be sending out a request for you to join us at some time soon. So we believe that it's extremely important that we have that conversation with people in the field, and that the opportunity to partner with our state agencies is valuable to us. So we want to thank NASDAQ. Special thank you specifically to Lynn Hammond with Hawaii and Delara Glass with New York. We certainly appreciate you sharing your experiences and your insight. And then we thank you, our participants, for joining us today. Again, this webinar will be posted on the NASDAQ site, and we will also be posting a link directly to it. And we will be sharing the questions and answers, that information with you as soon as possible. So thank you all, and appreciate your joining our webinar today. Hope to hear from you soon.